Tonight, we're drifting through the vast tapestry of Pokémon lore, from the very first moments of creation to the mysteries that still unfold across distant regions. Find a comfortable position and let your breathing slow as we journey through creation myths, ancient civilizations, and the quiet legends that shaped the Pokémon world. There's no need to remember every detail. Just let these stories wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you deeper into rest. From the birth of time itself to the guardians watching over peaceful meadows, each tale will guide you further toward sleep, surrounded by the soft glow of ancient mysteries. In the beginning, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no movement, just an endless void stretching in all directions where even the concept of direction had no meaning. Within this nothingness, however, something stirred. Not quite life, not quite energy, but potential itself taking form. From this absolute emptiness emerged a single, cosmic egg, floating in the darkness like a pearl of possibility waiting to unfold. The egg existed outside of time because time had not yet been born. It waited in that timeless moment, containing within its shell everything that would ever be. Then, with a gentleness that belied the magnitude of what was happening, the egg began to crack. Light spilled out, not harsh or blinding, but warm and welcoming, filling the void with the first glow of existence. From within this radiance stepped Arceus, the original one, the first being to draw breath in the newly forming universe. Arceus was unlike anything that would come after. Its form seemed to shift between physical presence and pure concept, existing as both individual creature and universal force. With its emergence, the very foundations of reality began to solidify. The void that had been empty became space with dimension and possibility. The timeless moment became the first tick of an eternal clock. Arceus looked upon the nothingness and saw infinite potential waiting to be shaped into something beautiful. The first act of creation was to establish order from chaos. Arceus breathed life into three beings who would govern the most fundamental aspects of existence. First came Dialga, emerging like a great steel dragon whose every heartbeat would become the rhythm of time itself. As Dialga took its first breath, moments began to flow like a vast river, carrying the universe from what was toward what would be. Past, present, and future stretched out in an orderly procession, creating the framework within which all stories could unfold. Next came Palkia, whose birth stabilized space and gave shape to the infinite. Where before there had been only endless void, Palkia's presence created dimension and distance, up and down, here and there. Its pearl-adorned form floated through the newly structured cosmos, stretching space like fabric, creating room for worlds and stars and all the wonders that would fill them. The walls that had once contained the universe shattered, replaced by infinite possibility extending in all directions. The third creation was more complex, for Arceus recognized that light required shadow, order needed chaos, and matter must be balanced by its opposite. So came Giratina, born to govern antimatter and serve as the shadow to Arceus's light. Giratina's form was magnificent, yet unsettling, embodying the necessary darkness that gives meaning to light. But Giratina's power proved too violent, too destructive for the delicate universe taking shape. Its very presence threatened to unravel the careful balance Dialga and Palkia were establishing. With what might have been sorrow, Arceus made the difficult decision to banish Giratina to a realm of its own. The distortion world came into being, a place where the normal rules didn't apply, where gravity flowed in all directions and time moved in spirals. Here, Giratina would rule alone, watching over antimatter and the spaces between spaces, serving as a guardian of the reverse side of reality. Though banished, it wasn't abandoned. Its role remained crucial, maintaining the cosmic balance from its strange realm where up and down had no meaning. With the fundamental forces of reality established, Arceus turned to a more personal creation. The universe needed not just physical laws, but consciousness to appreciate them. minds to explore the vast spaces that had been created, and hearts to feel wonder at the beauty taking shape. From its essence, Arceus crafted three small beings who would be known as the Lake Trio. Though they would one day inhabit not just lakes, but the consciousness of every thinking being. Uxie emerged first, tiny and golden, with eyes that held all the knowledge that would ever exist. Its birth gave all future beings the ability to learn, to solve problems, to understand the world around them. Uxie would become the keeper of wisdom, ensuring that no creature would be left without the capacity to grow and understand. When Uxie blinked its eyes for the first time, intelligence sparked across the forming universe like stars igniting in the darkness. Mesprit followed, pink and gentle, carrying within its small form the full spectrum of emotion. Its birth created the ability to feel joy and sorrow, love and loss, hope and despair. Without Mesprit's gift, the universe would have been nothing but cold calculation and mechanical process. Instead, it would be filled with beings capable of wonder, of forming bonds, of caring for one another. Mesprit's first tear of joy watered the seeds of compassion that would bloom throughout creation. Last came Azulf, blue and determined, embodying the power of will itself. Its birth gave all beings the strength to act on their knowledge and emotions, to make choices and shape their own destinies. Azulf carried within it the spark that would drive exploration, creativity, and the endless striving toward something better. Without willpower, knowledge and emotion would be meaningless. Azulf ensured that every conscious being would have the power to change their world. These three small guardians would eventually settle into quiet lakes across the universe, watching over the mental and emotional development of all living things. Their influence would be subtle but essential, flowing like underground streams through the consciousness of every creature that would ever think or feel or choose. But Arceus wasn't finished. The universe had structure and consciousness, but it needed life to fill the vast spaces that had been created. Here, the creation story becomes less certain, branching into theories that scholars still debate in hushed, reverent tones. Some believe that Arceus continued its direct creation, bringing forth the great legendary Pokémon who would shape individual worlds and regions. Under this theory, beings like Kyogre and Groudon, Regigigas and Ho-Oh, all emerged from Arceus's will, each given a specific role in the ongoing work of creation. Others, however, point to a simpler, more elegant solution. They believe that Arceus's final direct creation was a single, small, pink Pokémon with large blue eyes and a gentle demeanor. Mew, they say, was crafted to be the perfect vessel for life itself, containing within its genetic structure the potential to become any other Pokémon that would ever exist. Mew's DNA was written like a vast library, holding the blueprints for every form life would take. This theory suggests that Mew then evolved and adapted in countless ways, not through battle or struggle, but through natural development and environmental influence. Over vast stretches of time, Mew populations spread across the forming worlds, each group adapting to different conditions, different needs, different possibilities. Some became the mighty legendaries who would shape continents and control weather. Others became the countless species of regular Pokémon who would fill every niche in the ecosystem. The evidence for this theory lies in Mew's unique genetic structure, which scientists have discovered contains traces of every other Pokémon's DNA. It also explains why Mew are now so rare, their population having been spread thin across all the forms they evolved into. Once, the theory suggests, Mew were common throughout the universe. Now they exist as living fossils, remnants of the original template from which all Pokémon life emerged. Both theories have their appeal, and perhaps both contain elements of truth. Maybe Arceus created some legendaries directly while using Mew as the source for all other Pokémon life. Maybe the process was even more complex, with multiple stages of creation and evolution interweaving over cosmic timescales. The beauty of creation myths lies not in their absolute accuracy, but in their ability to inspire wonder at the magnificent complexity of existence. As this first phase of creation drew to a close, Arceus performed one final act before withdrawing to rest. It created 3 sacred artifacts that would serve as focal points for its power, objects through which future beings might one day communicate with the original one. The adamant crystal blazed with the essence of Dialga's temporal power, while the lustrous orb shimmered with Palkia's spatial energy. The Griseous core pulsed with the shadowy power of Giratina, a reminder that even banished forces remained part of the cosmic whole. With these artifacts hidden away in a realm beyond ordinary reach, Arceus withdrew to its own dimension to rest. The universe was no longer empty void, but a vast, living system with the potential for infinite growth and beauty. Time flowed steadily forward. Space provided room for countless worlds, and life was ready to flourish in forms beyond imagining. In the aftermath of this cosmic birth, the universe settled into a peaceful rhythm. Stars began to form and shine. Worlds coalesced from cosmic dust, and the first tentative forms of life began to stir. It was a gentle time, free from conflict or struggle, as if the entire universe was taking a deep, satisfied breath after the monumental effort of coming into existence. This was the true beginning, not with violence or chaos, but with intention and care. Every atom that formed, every world that spun into orbit, every spark of life that flickered into being was part of a grand design of almost infinite complexity and beauty. And at the center of it all, 3 small guardians watched over the growing universe, ensuring that knowledge, emotion, and will would guide its development towards something wonderful. The creation was complete, but the story was just beginning. Soon, on countless worlds across the universe, Pokémon would begin their own journeys of growth and discovery, each one carrying within them the spark of that original creation, each one a living testament to the beauty and wonder that could emerge from the void when guided by wisdom and love. As the cosmic foundations of the universe settled into their eternal rhythms, worlds began to form and flourish, each developing its own character and stories. Among these emerging lands, 2 regions would become particularly significant in the early chronicles of human and Pokémon interaction. Kanto and Johto, connected by more than geography, would witness some of the most profound moments in Pokémon history. Their quiet valleys and ancient towers holding secrets that still whisper through the ages. In Kanto, the relationship between humans and Pokémon took on a distinctly scientific character. Perhaps it was the region's natural resources or the particular mindset of its inhabitants, but Kanto became a place where curiosity drove people to probe deeper into the mysteries of Pokémon biology than anywhere else in the world. This spirit of inquiry led to remarkable discoveries, but also to one of the most tragic tales in all of Pokémon lore. Deep in the warm waters surrounding Cinnabar Island, where volcanic activity created a perfect environment for research, scientists established laboratories dedicated to understanding the deepest secrets of Pokémon genetics. The island's natural hot springs and mineral-rich environment seemed to enhance their studies, and for years, peaceful research continued in harmony with the local Pokémon population. The scientists were gentle souls, driven by wonder rather than ambition, seeking to understand rather than exploit. Their breakthrough came when an expedition to South America's deepest jungles returned with extraordinary news. They had discovered Mew, the legendary ancestor of all Pokémon, in its natural habitat. More remarkably still, they had witnessed something unprecedented in recorded history. The Mew had given birth, bringing forth a second Mew in what seemed like the first observed reproduction of this ancient species in modern times. The newborn Pokémon was brought back to Cinnabar Island, where it was initially treated with the reverence due to such a remarkable creature. The scientists studied it gently, marveling at its genetic structure and the incredible potential contained within its small pink form. For a time, the research proceeded peacefully, with the young Pokémon showing remarkable intelligence and adaptability, seeming almost to cooperate with the studies being conducted. But somewhere in the process, the nature of the research began to change. Perhaps it was pressure from outside forces, or maybe the scientists themselves became too fascinated with the possibilities they were uncovering. The gentle observation transformed into active experimentation, The Pokemon's DNA was not just studied, but actively manipulated, rearranged, and enhanced in ways that nature had never intended. The creature that emerged from these experiments was designated Mewtwo, though it bore little resemblance to its genetic predecessor. Where Mew was playful and curious, Mewtwo was serious and intense. Where Mew possessed a gentle wisdom, Mewtwo burned with fierce intelligence that seemed almost too powerful for its physical form to contain. The experiments had succeeded in their goal of creating a Pokémon with enhanced psychic abilities, but they had also created something unprecedented in the natural world, a being of immense power with no natural place in the ecosystem. The scientists' journals, discovered years later in the abandoned Cinnabar mansion, reveal their growing unease with what they had accomplished. Their creation was undeniably powerful, possessing psychic abilities that dwarfed even the most potent wild Pokémon. But it was also unstable, prone to sudden bursts of emotion and displays of power that left the laboratory equipment twisted into impossible shapes. The final entries speak of their creation not as a triumph, but as a being deserving of compassion for the unnatural circumstances of its existence. The inevitable escape came not through violence, but through a simple demonstration of power that left no doubt about who was truly in control. Mewtwo simply walked through the laboratory's reinforced walls as if they were mist, psychically dismantling every barrier without apparent effort. The scientists watched in awed silence as their creation departed, floating serenely toward the mainland, its destination already decided. Mewtwo chose Cerulean Cave as its sanctuary, a place of deep waters and winding passages where few humans ever ventured. The cave's natural acoustics seemed to soothe the troubled Pokémon, and the isolation provided space to contemplate its unique existence. Local residents sometimes reported seeing strange lights emanating from deep within the cave, but these sightings were dismissed as natural phosphorescence or tricks of reflected moonlight. Years later, some brave trainers would venture into those depths and encounter Mewtwo in its chosen refuge. They found not a monster, but a profoundly thoughtful being grappling with questions of identity and purpose that no other Pokémon had ever faced. Mewtwo's story became a quiet reminder that even the most well-intentioned scientific pursuits could have unintended consequences, and that sometimes the greatest kindness was simply allowing beings to find their own path. The Cinnabar Laboratory's experiments also gave birth to other artificial Pokémon, including Porygon, a creature of pure code and digital energy. Unlike Mewtwo's tragic origin, Porygon's creation seemed to bring its makers only joy, a playful digital companion that bridged the gap between the natural and technological worlds. Perhaps the difference lay in Porygon being created from nothing rather than manipulated from existing life, allowing it to exist without the existential burden that troubled Mewtwo. While Kanto pursued its scientific mysteries, whispers of older, darker stories occasionally surfaced. The most persistent of these tales centered around references to a war that had supposedly taken place in the region's recent past. The evidence was subtle, but persistent. Lieutenant Surge, the gym leader of Vermilion City, would sometimes make cryptic comments about his electric-type Pokémon, saving his life during wartime. But he never elaborated on these statements when pressed. More telling was a demographic anomaly that researchers noticed when studying Kanto's population. There seemed to be a notable absence of middle-aged men throughout the region. The older generation was well represented, as were younger men and women of all ages. But there was a conspicuous gap in the population of men who would have been of military age during a hypothetical conflict 20 or 30 years prior. This pattern suggested some event that had specifically affected that demographic, though no official records of such a conflict existed. Some theorists proposed that Kanto had fought a civil war with neighboring Johto, pointing to the region's shared Pokémon League structure as evidence of some past political integration. Others suggested involvement in a conflict with distant regions, perhaps explaining Lieutenant Surge's frequent references to his American background. The truth, if there was one, remained buried in official silence and the selective memories of those old enough to remember. Whatever conflict may have occurred seemed to have ended in a peace so complete that even its memory had been largely erased. Kanto, in the present day, was a region of bustling cities and thriving Pokémon habitats, where humans and Pokémon coexisted with remarkable harmony. The scars of any past trauma had healed so completely that only these subtle demographic echoes remained as evidence of troubles long resolved. Across the Silver Mountains that separated Kanto from Johto, an entirely different relationship with the legendary and mystical had developed. Where Kanto sought to understand through science, Johto maintained a more reverent, traditional approach to the mysteries of Pokémon. Ancient traditions were preserved in Johto's temples and sacred sites, creating a region where the past lived alongside the present in comfortable harmony. The most significant event in Johto's recorded history centered around two magnificent towers that once graced Ecruteak City. These structures, built centuries ago by master craftsmen and Pokémon working in harmony, stood as symbols of the region's spiritual connection to legendary Pokémon. The Tin Tower, also known as the Bell Tower, reached toward the heavens with graceful lines and perfect proportions. Its counterpart, the Brass Tower, was equally beautiful but destined for a very different fate. The tragedy began on a night when storm clouds gathered over Ecruteak City with unusual intensity. Lightning flickered constantly across the sky, and the air itself seemed charged with more than ordinary electrical energy. Local residents took shelter as the storm built to unprecedented intensity. Winds howling through the streets, and rain falling in sheets that made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. At the height of the storm, a single bolt of lightning, brighter and more powerful than any that had come before, struck the Brass Tower with devastating precision. The ancient wood, dried by centuries of age, caught fire immediately. Within minutes, what had been a masterpiece of architecture was transformed into a towering inferno, flames reaching toward the storm clouds as if trying to return the lightning's energy to the sky. 3 Pokémon were trapped within the burning tower as it collapsed. Their exact species has been lost to history, though many scholars believe they were evolutions based on their later forms and the types they would eventually embody. What is certain is that all 3 perished in the flames, their life essence released into the storm-charged air, just as the tower's roof collapsed in a shower of burning timber and sacred artifacts. The fire might have been just another tragedy in a world where natural disasters were common, but Johto was watched over by a guardian whose power extended to the very boundary between life and death. Ho-Oh, the rainbow phoenix whose feathers caught light like prisms, witnessed the destruction from its perch atop the neighboring Tin Tower. As the storm began to clear and the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, Ho-Oh made a decision that would echo through the ages. Drawing upon powers that touched the fundamental forces of life itself, Ho-Oh descended into the smoking ruins of the Brass Tower. Its rainbow-colored feathers began to glow with an inner light that was both beautiful and otherworldly, each color representing a different aspect of the life force it was about to channel. The Phoenix Pokémon song filled the air, a melody so pure and powerful that it seemed to reach beyond the physical world into the realm of departed spirits. 3 new beings emerged from the ashes and sacred flames. Raikou materialized first, electricity crackling around its yellow form like captured lightning, embodying the very storm that had caused the tragedy. Its roar echoed with the sound of thunder, and its presence seemed to charge the air itself with potential energy. Next came Entei, rising from the flames like a living embodiment of fire's creative and destructive power. Its red mane flowed like liquid flame, and each footstep left glowing paw prints that smoldered long after its passage. Finally, Suicune appeared, as graceful and serene as a mountain spring, its blue form seeming to flow rather than walk across the ground. Where Raikou embodied the storm's fury and Entei carried its destructive fire, Suicune represented the rain that had ultimately quenched the blaze, the gentle force that brought healing after devastation. These 3 legendary beasts, born from tragedy and resurrection, became wanderers across the Johto landscape. They were spotted in different locations throughout the region, never staying in one place for long, as if their nature compelled them to keep moving, spreading Ho-Oh's gift of renewal wherever they traveled. Trainers who encountered them spoke of feelings of awe and reverence, as if in the presence of beings that existed on the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds. Ho-Oh's act of resurrection established Johto as a region where the mystical was not feared but celebrated. where ancient traditions maintained their power alongside modern progress. The Tin Tower became even more sacred after these events, a place where pilgrims came to honor both the tragedy that had occurred and the miracle that had followed. Beyond the towers and legendary beasts, Johto held other mysteries that connected it to the deepest history of human civilization. The ruins of Alph, scattered across several locations, contained symbols that seemed to be among the oldest forms of written language ever discovered. These symbols matched perfectly with the forms of Pokémon known as Unknown, creating an intriguing question about which came first, the written language or the Pokémon that resembled it. The Unknown themselves were enigmatic creatures, existing more as living symbols than typical Pokémon. When they gathered in groups, they seemed capable of manifesting thoughts and dreams into reality, suggesting a connection between language, consciousness, and the fundamental forces that shaped the world. Their presence in the ruins implied that ancient civilizations had somehow worked alongside these reality-shaping Pokémon, perhaps using their power to record important knowledge or perform ceremonies whose purpose was now lost to time. Scattered throughout Johto's forests was another gentle guardian, Celebi, the time-travel Pokémon, whose connection to nature transcended temporal boundaries. Unlike the dramatic legendary beasts, Celebi's influence was subtle and nurturing, appearing in forests across different time periods to ensure their health and continuity. Travelers sometimes reported glimpsing a small, green figure flitting between the trees. But these sightings were often dismissed as sunlight playing through leaves or the imagination of tired wanderers. Celebi's gift was the kind of miracle that went largely unnoticed. The quiet work of ensuring that saplings grew into mighty trees, that streams continued to flow clear and clean, and that the delicate balance of forest ecosystems remained stable across decades and centuries. Its time-traveling abilities meant that it could appear whenever and wherever nature needed guidance, making it perhaps the most diligent conservationist in Pokémon history. The forests under Celebi's care became sanctuaries not just for Pokémon, but for humans seeking peace and renewal. There was something about these woods that calmed the spirit and cleared the mind, as if Celebi's presence had imbued them with a timeless tranquility that offered respite from the complexities of modern life. Many people found that problems which seemed overwhelming in the outside world became manageable after spending time in these sacred groves. Together, Kanto and Johto represented two different approaches to understanding the world's mysteries. Kanto's scientific method produced remarkable discoveries, but also cautionary tales about the responsibility that came with knowledge. Johto's traditional wisdom preserved ancient connections to legendary Pokémon and natural forces that science alone could not fully explain. Both approaches had their place in a world where Pokémon and humans were still learning to coexist, each contributing to a greater understanding of the intricate relationships that made their world so rich and complex. As night settles over these ancient regions, you can imagine the gentle glow of Ho-Oh's feathers, catching the last light of sunset as it circles the restored Tin Tower. In the depths of Cerulean Cave, Mewtwo contemplates questions that have no easy answers, finding peace in solitude. Celebi flits through time-touched forests where every tree whispers stories of growth and renewal. The legendary beasts wander quiet paths under starlight, carrying Ho-Oh's blessing to places where it's needed most. These timeless guardians watch over a world where tragedy and miracle walk hand in hand, where ancient wisdom and modern knowledge combine to create something beautiful and lasting. Beyond the familiar regions of Kanto and Johto lay a tropical paradise where the fundamental forces of the planet itself took physical form. Hoenn was a land shaped by the eternal dance between earth and sea, where primal powers that had slumbered since the world's formation occasionally stirred from their rest to reshape coastlines and create new islands. Here, in a region blessed with warm seas and volcanic soils, some of the most ancient Pokémon in existence had chosen to make their eternal homes. Deep within the planet's molten core, far below even the deepest ocean trenches, Groudon had formed during the early epochs of the world's creation. This was not a birth in any ordinary sense, but rather a slow coalescence of magma and mineral, stone and fire, over geological ages that dwarfed human comprehension. Groudon's body was the earth itself made manifest, each of its massive footsteps capable of raising mountains or creating valleys, its breath hot enough to transform desert sand into volcanic glass. Groudon's nature was expansion, the drive to create more land for Pokémon and plants to inhabit. Its dreams, when it slumbered in the depths, were of vast continents stretching from horizon to horizon, of fertile plains where countless species could thrive, of mountain ranges, reaching toward the sky like the Earth's own prayers. When it stirred from sleep, lava flowed like rivers, new islands rose steaming from the waves, and the very geography of regions could be rewritten in a matter of days. In the deepest ocean trenches, where sunlight had never penetrated and pressure crushed ordinary matter into strange new forms, Kyogre had undergone its own ancient formation. Born from the meeting of currents and tides, from the patient accumulation of water's power over endless millennia, Kyogre embodied the sea's eternal patience and irresistible force. Its blue form moved through the depths like a living tsunami, each graceful motion capable of shifting ocean currents that would affect weather patterns across the globe. Where Groudon dreamed of infinite land, Kyogre envisioned boundless seas. In its deepest meditations, it saw a world where gentle waves lapped at the shores of small islands, where marine Pokémon could explore vast underwater kingdoms, where rain fell in perfect measure to nourish all growing things. Its songs, too deep for human ears to detect, called to the waters of the world, summoning storms that could reshape coastlines and fill ancient lakebeds with life-giving moisture. For countless ages, these two titans had coexisted in peaceful slumber, their opposing natures balanced in the harmony of deep sleep. But periodically, something would disturb their rest. Perhaps it was a shift in the planet's magnetic field, or solar radiation reaching unusual intensity, or simply the natural cycles of geological time reaching a point where change was inevitable. When one stirred, the other inevitably followed, and their awakening invariably led to conflict. These battles were not fought from malice or anger, but from the simple incompatibility of their essential natures. When Groudon rose from the Earth's depths, magma fountained into the sky, and new landmasses began forming at incredible speed. Kyogre's response was to summon torrential rains and tidal waves, the ocean's attempt to reclaim what it saw as its rightful domain. Neither Pokémon intended destruction, but their very presence was so fundamentally opposed that the environment around them became a battleground between the elements. The skies would darken as Groudon's heat met Kyogre's storms, creating weather patterns of unimaginable intensity. Lightning cracked constantly through clouds heavy with both ash and water, while the ground shook with seismic activity as new mountains rose and fell within hours. The flora and fauna of affected regions had learned to recognize the signs of these awakenings and would flee to safe areas, following instinctual migration patterns passed down through countless generations. During one such conflict, when both titans had been battling for weeks without resolution, salvation came from an unexpected direction. High above the chaos, in the stratosphere where the air was thin and the stars seemed close enough to touch, another ancient presence had been watching. Rayquaza, the sky-high Pokémon, had observed these periodic conflicts for eons, usually content to let the land and sea Pokémon exhaust themselves before returning to slumber. But this time was different. The battle raged longer and more fiercely than any before, threatening to permanently alter the climate of not just Hoenn but the entire planet. Rayquaza realized that intervention was necessary, not to take sides, but to remind both combatants that there was a realm above their domains that demanded respect. Rayquaza's descent from the upper atmosphere was like a green comet streaking through the storm clouds. Its serpentine form cut through the chaotic weather with impossible grace, and its presence immediately changed the character of the conflict. Here was a Pokémon that commanded the skies themselves, that could call upon winds and atmospheric pressure as tools of mediation. Its roar silenced both the rumbling of shifting continents and the crash of enormous waves. The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. Rayquaza did not fight Groudon and Kyogre so much as remind them of their place in the larger order of things. Land and sea were important, but without sky to hold them together, neither could exist. The atmosphere that Rayquaza controlled was what allowed rain to fall and land to breathe, what carried the very air that sustained all life. In the face of this greater perspective, the conflict between Earth and ocean seemed suddenly petty and unnecessary. Both titans acknowledged Rayquaza's authority and withdrew to their respective domains. Groudon sinking back into volcanic chambers deep underground, Kyogre descending to abyssal trenches where the water was black and still. The storms cleared, the earthquakes subsided, and Hoenn settled back into the peaceful tropical climate that would become its permanent character. The people who had witnessed this intervention began to revere Rayquaza as more than just another powerful Pokémon. To them, it became a symbol of wisdom and mediation. The force that maintained balance when opposing powers threatened to tear the world apart. The Draconid people, in particular, built their entire culture around venerating the sky-high Pokémon, creating traditions and ceremonies designed to honor its role as peacekeeper of the heavens. These ancient peoples understood something that later civilizations would sometimes forget: that power without wisdom was dangerous, and that the greatest strength often lay not in dominating others, but in knowing when and how to intervene. They built shrines at high altitudes where they believed Rayquaza's presence could be felt most strongly, and they trained Pokémon that shared some affinity with sky and wind, hoping to understand even a fraction of their celestial guardian's wisdom. While these primal dramas played out on a continental scale, other ancient powers were stirring in different parts of Hoenn. Regigigas, the colossal Pokémon whose footsteps had shaped continents in earlier ages, had not been idle during its periods of wakefulness. From its massive form, it had created smaller versions of itself, golems designed to assist in the ongoing work of geographical formation and maintenance. Regirock emerged first, a living mountain of stone and mineral that could shape solid matter with its will alone. Its body was an accumulation of rocks from different geological periods, each stone carrying within it the memory of the Earth's changes over millions of years. Where Regirock walked, unstable terrain became solid, loose soil compressed into fertile ground, and dangerous cliff faces restructured themselves into safe passages for traveling Pokémon. Regice followed, born from glaciers so ancient they predated most of the world's current climate patterns. Its body maintained temperatures that could preserve organic matter for millennia, and its presence could create microclimates where ice-type Pokémon could thrive even in tropical regions. In its frozen form were locked the atmospheric conditions of prehistoric ages, making it a living record of how the planet's climate had evolved over geological time. Registeel completed the original trio, a Pokémon whose metallic body was composed of materials not found in nature. Its steel was stronger than any alloy humans would later develop, yet it remained flexible enough to reshape itself as needed. Registeel's presence could transmute base metals into more useful forms and could detect and extract valuable minerals from deep underground without disturbing the surrounding ecosystem. These three golems worked in harmony with their creator, helping to fine-tune the geographic features that Regigigas's massive movements had established. They were living tools of creation, each one capable of accomplishing in days what natural forces might take centuries to achieve. Their work was patient and methodical, lacking the dramatic conflicts of the weather legendaries but no less important to the world's ongoing development. However, as civilizations developed and humans began to understand the enormous power these artificial Pokémon possessed, fear began to outweigh reverence. The same people who had worshipped Rayquaza as a benevolent mediator looked upon the golems and saw only the potential for destruction. They could not distinguish between power used for creation and power that might be turned toward less benevolent purposes. The decision to seal away Regigigas and its creations was not made lightly, but it reflected a fundamental shift in how humans related to legendary Pokémon. Rather than trusting in the wisdom and benevolent intent of these ancient beings, they chose to remove the possibility of harm by removing the Pokémon themselves from the world. Elaborate rituals were devised, and special chambers were constructed in remote locations where the golems could be imprisoned. The sealing process required sacrifices from the human communities involved, not just in terms of resources and effort, but in the loss of the beneficial effects the golems had provided. Without Regirock's geological maintenance, Some regions became more prone to landslides and erosion. Without Regierice's climate regulation, certain ecosystems began to shift in unpredictable ways. Without Registeel's mineral processing, valuable resources became harder to locate and extract. But the fear of what might happen if these powerful beings turned destructive outweighed the practical benefits they provided. The sealed chambers were hidden and protected by complex puzzles and barriers, ensuring that future generations would have to demonstrate both intelligence and determination before they could accidentally or intentionally release the sleeping golems. In later ages, when natural disasters struck and humans struggled to address geological problems that the sealed golems could have easily resolved, some questioned the wisdom of these ancient decisions. But by then, the knowledge of how to safely interact with such powerful beings had been largely lost, making the seals seem more necessary than ever. As Hoenn settled into its modern character, shaped by these ancient conflicts and collaborations, it became a region where the power of nature was both celebrated and respected. The people who made their homes among its volcanic islands and tropical forests understood that they lived in a place where legendary forces slumbered just beneath the surface, where the very ground they walked on and the seas they sailed had been shaped by Pokémon whose power dwarfed human comprehension. This awareness created a culture of reverence for the natural world that would persist through generations. Hoenn's trainers developed a particular affinity for Pokémon that embodied natural forces, seeking not to dominate them, but to work in partnership with powers they could never fully control. The region's gym leaders and Elite Four reflected this philosophy, each one demonstrating how humans could achieve harmony with Pokémon, whose abilities touched on the fundamental forces that shaped their world. As you rest in this peaceful moment, imagine yourself floating in the warm seas around Hoenn, feeling the gentle current that carries the memory of Kyogre's ancient passage. Above you, trade winds blow with the blessing of Rayquaza's protection, carrying the scent of tropical flowers and the sound of distant Pokémon calls. Deep below, the earth rests stable and secure, shaped by forces so ancient and powerful that their very restraint is a gift to all who inhabit this beautiful region. In the northern reaches of the world, where snow-capped peaks touched the sky and ancient glaciers carved valleys of breathtaking beauty, lay a region that would become known as Sinnoh. This was a land where time and space themselves felt more tangible, where the fundamental forces that governed reality seemed to rest closer to the surface of everyday experience. Here, among mountain temples and crystalline lakes, some of the most profound encounters between humans and legendary Pokémon would unfold across centuries of reverent tradition. The story of Sinnoh began with fear, though it would eventually transform into something far more beautiful. Regigigas, the colossal Pokémon whose movements had shaped continents, had completed its great work of geographic formation and settled into a deep slumber in the northern reaches of what would become the region. Even in sleep, its presence was overwhelming to the early humans who discovered it. Here was a being whose dreams could cause minor earthquakes, whose breathing created wind patterns that affected weather across vast distances. The people of that ancient era looked upon the slumbering giant and saw both wonder and terror. They understood that Regigigas had played a role in creating the very land they inhabited, but they also recognized that its power was beyond anything they could hope to control or even fully comprehend. The decision to seal it away was born not from malice, but from a profound sense of their own limitations in the face of such cosmic force. The Snow Point Temple was constructed over generations, each stone placed with careful consideration for both architectural beauty and mystical purpose. The builders worked slowly and quietly, taking care not to disturb the sleeping Pokémon beneath as they erected walls thick enough to contain continental forces and chambers deep enough to muffle the sound of breathing that could shake mountains. The temple's design reflected a deep understanding of both engineering and spiritual principles. Its corridors wound in patterns that channeled and dispersed seismic energy, ensuring that even if Regigigas stirred in its sleep, the vibrations would be absorbed and redirected harmlessly into the surrounding mountain. The walls were carved with symbols of reverence and restraint, reminders to future generations of both the power that lay beneath and the wisdom required to leave it undisturbed. As the temple neared completion, the builders performed one final act of creation that demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of the forces they were containing. Working with techniques that would be lost to later ages, they created 2 additional golems from pure energy rather than physical matter. Regidrago embodied the fierce power of draconic force, its crystalline body containing energies that could reshape reality itself. Regieleki was formed from electrical potential so concentrated it seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, its movements too fast for ordinary perception to follow. These energy-based golems were different from their rock, ice, and steel predecessors. Where the physical golems could shape matter directly, the energy golems worked with more fundamental forces, able to influence the very laws of physics in localized areas. Their creation represented the peak of ancient Pokémon-human collaboration, a fusion of natural power and human understanding that would not be equaled for thousands of years. But like their creator and siblings, these magnificent beings were also sealed away, hidden in chambers so remote and protected by puzzles so complex that only the most dedicated seekers would ever find them. The builders scattered across the region, taking with them only fragments of the knowledge they had used, ensuring that the full secret of awakening these powers would require patience, wisdom, and the cooperation of many minds working together. As centuries passed and the immediate memory of Regigigas faded into legend, the people of the region began to develop a more nuanced relationship with the divine forces that surrounded them. They came to understand that their land was watched over by Arceus itself, though they knew the original one by a different name. To them, it was Almighty Sinnoh, the great spirit whose presence could be felt in the flow of time and the stability of space, in the cycle of seasons and the eternal dance of day and night. The worship of Almighty Sinnoh was not built around grand temples or elaborate ceremonies, but around a quiet recognition that every aspect of their daily lives was touched by divine influence. Farmers planting crops felt the blessing of time's steady passage in their seeds' growth. Travelers crossing mountain passes experienced the gift of stable space in their ability to navigate vast distances. Artists and craftspeople saw divine inspiration in their work, understanding that creativity itself was a participation in the ongoing act of creation. This spiritual awareness reached its peak in the story of the ancient hero, a figure whose legend would inspire countless generations. The hero was not born to nobility or magical power, but was simply someone who recognized the sacred nature of the world around them and chose to dedicate their life to deepening that understanding. Their journey began with a simple decision to befriend the Pokémon they encountered, not to capture or command them, but to build relationships based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Over many years of patient travel and careful attention, the ancient hero formed bonds with 10 special Pokémon that embodied different aspects of their region's character. These were not ordinary Pokémon, but noble beings whose connection to the land ran deeper than typical evolutionary relationships. Each one taught the hero something different about the nature of existence, the importance of balance, and the responsibility that came with power. The hero's true quest began when they discovered the first of 18 stone plates scattered across the region, each one inscribed with symbols that seemed to pulse with inner light. These plates, they gradually realized, were fragments of Arceus's own essence, pieces of the original one's power that had been left in the world as both test and gift for those wise enough to seek them. The search for these plates became a pilgrimage that took the hero to every corner of the region, from the highest mountain peaks to the deepest lake shores. Each plate was hidden in a location that reflected its particular aspect of divine power, requiring not just physical courage to reach, but spiritual understanding to recognize. The hero learned to read the landscape itself as a text written by Arceus, understanding how geology and weather, flora and fauna, all worked together to create a living mandala of divine expression. When all 18 plates had been gathered, something extraordinary occurred. The combined presence of these artifacts opened a pathway to Arceus's own realm, a space that existed beyond ordinary reality, where the original one could communicate directly with mortal beings. The encounter that followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. but a test of worthiness that encompassed every lesson the hero had learned during their long journey. Arceus recognized in the ancient hero a being who had achieved something rare among mortals. A complete understanding of their place in the cosmic order, coupled with the humility to use power only in service of that greater harmony. The blessing that followed transformed both the hero and their Pokémon companions, granting them abilities that transcended normal limitations, while binding them even more closely to their role as protectors of the region's spiritual balance. The hero's most famous accomplishment was their confrontation with Giratina when the renegade Pokémon briefly escaped from the Distortion World. Using the wisdom gained from Arceus and the combined power of their noble Pokémon, the hero was able to calm Giratina's rage and guide it back to its proper realm, demonstrating that even the most chaotic forces could be approached with understanding rather than mere opposition. As the ancient hero's story passed into legend, the region of Hisui developed a rich spiritual tradition built around the lessons of their example. Communities formed around shared reverence for different aspects of the divine. But this spiritual diversity eventually led to philosophical divisions that would shape the region's history for generations to come. The Diamond Clan emerged among those who felt most drawn to Dialga's mastery of time, viewing existence through the lens of growth, change, and the eternal flow of moments from past to future. They built their rituals around the cycles of seasons and generations, celebrating the way individual lives contributed to an ongoing story that stretched across centuries. To them, the sacred was found in patience, in the gradual accumulation of wisdom, and in the understanding that all things had their proper time for beginning and ending. The Pearl Clan, conversely, oriented themselves around Palkia's dominion over space, finding the divine in the vast interconnectedness of all things across infinite distances. They practiced meditation techniques designed to expand awareness beyond immediate surroundings, seeking to experience their unity with Pokémon and places far beyond their physical location. Their ceremonies emphasized the simultaneous existence of all possibilities, the way every choice created ripples across the fabric of reality itself. Both clans were sincere in their devotion, but their different approaches to understanding the same cosmic truth led to disagreements that would persist for generations. Each group was convinced that their interpretation of Almighty Sinnoh was more accurate, unable to see that they were simply experiencing different facets of the same infinite being. These philosophical debates were generally peaceful, taking the form of scholarly discussions and friendly competitions rather than violent conflicts. But they did create a cultural division that affected how different communities related to legendary Pokémon. During this period, 4 other legendary beings arrived in Hisui, drawn by the region's spiritual intensity and the opportunities it offered for their own particular forms of divine service. Tornadus and Thundurus came as a pair, their relationship embodying the eternal tension between creative and destructive forces in nature. Tornadus brought the winds that scattered seeds and pollinated plants, that cleared stagnant air and carried moisture to drought-stricken areas. Thundurus followed with the storms that watered the land and charged the atmosphere with energy, but also brought lightning that could start fires and winds that could level forests. Their rivalry was not malicious, but rather reflected the natural opposition between different aspects of weather systems. Where Tornadus sought to spread and disperse, Thundurus aimed to concentrate and intensify. Their conflicts created the dynamic weather patterns that kept the region's ecosystem healthy and diverse, but when their competition became too intense, the results could be devastating for the communities caught in the middle. Landorus emerged as the mediator between these opposing forces, embodying the fertile ground where wind and storm could work together productively. Its presence transformed their conflicts into collaboration, showing how the apparent opposition between dispersal and concentration could create the perfect conditions for plant growth and soil fertility. Where Landorus walked, barren ground became rich farmland, and the chaotic energies of its companions were channeled into life-giving abundance. Later, Enamorus joined this group, bringing with it the final element needed for complete ecological balance. While the other 3 controlled the physical aspects of fertility, Enamorus governed the emotional and spiritual connections that allowed communities to thrive. Its influence helped Pokémon form stronger pair bonds, encouraged cooperation between different species, and inspired the kind of love and care that sustained healthy populations across generations. These four forces of nature, as they came to be known, established a pattern of seasonal residence in Hisui, each one taking responsibility for different aspects of the region's annual cycles. Their presence blessed the land with abundance, while their occasional conflicts reminded inhabitants that nature's gifts required respect and careful stewardship to maintain. Throughout Hisui, sacred sites were established where these various legendary Pokémon could be honored and, when necessary, communicated with. These temples and shrines were built not to contain or control divine power, but to provide appropriate settings for respectful interaction between mortal and immortal beings. The architecture was always designed to complement rather than dominate the natural landscape, creating spaces where the boundary between human civilization and wild nature became beautifully blurred. In quiet moments at these sacred places, visitors often reported feeling a profound sense of connection to forces far greater than themselves, while simultaneously experiencing deep peace and personal clarity. The legendary Pokémon of Sinnoh, it seemed, were not distant and untouchable gods, but accessible guides whose wisdom was available to anyone who approached with genuine reverence and openness to learning. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself walking through one of these ancient temple grounds in the soft light of dawn, feeling the presence of time and space themselves as gentle, protective forces watching over your sleep. The wisdom of ages flows through the mountain air, carrying with it the promise that all things unfold in their proper season, and that you are held safely in the same cosmic order that guides the stars in their courses and the seasons in their endless, peaceful dance. Far across the ocean from the snow-capped peaks of Sinnoh, where different winds carried different stories, lay a region that would become known for wrestling with questions not of power, but of wisdom. Unova was a land where the deepest mysteries were not geological or cosmic, but philosophical, where legendary Pokémon emerged not from primal forces, but from the complexity of conscious thought and moral reasoning. Here, among growing cities and wild forests, the relationship between Pokémon and humans would explore territories of the spirit that earlier regions had barely begun to imagine. In ancient times, before the great cities rose and before the questions that would divide kingdoms had even been conceived, Unova was ruled by two brothers whose bond seemed as eternal as the cycles of day and night. They were united not just by blood, but by a shared vision of what their land could become. A place where Pokémon and humans would work together to build something greater than either could achieve alone. Their partnership was blessed and amplified by a single dragon Pokémon of extraordinary power, whose presence seemed to embody the perfect harmony they sought to create. This original dragon was unlike any legendary Pokémon that had come before or would come after, where others embodied natural forces or cosmic principles. This being represented something more abstract, yet equally fundamental: the perfect fusion of opposing ideals into a single, coherent whole. Its presence brought peace not through dominance or mediation, but through demonstrating that apparent contradictions could coexist in beautiful harmony when approached with wisdom and genuine understanding. Under the guidance of this remarkable Pokémon, the brothers created a kingdom that flourished beyond all expectations. Cities grew in perfect balance with wild spaces. Technology developed in harmony with natural systems, and conflicts between different communities were resolved through patient dialogue rather than force. The dragon's influence seemed to inspire everyone it encountered to reach beyond their immediate concerns and consider how their actions affected the greater good. For years, this golden age continued, each season bringing new achievements in art, science, and the subtle craft of living peacefully with other conscious beings. The brothers ruled jointly, their different perspectives on governance complementing each other perfectly, while their dragon companion ensured that their decisions always reflected both practical wisdom and higher ideals. It seemed as though they had discovered a formula for perpetual harmony, a way of organizing society that could endure for millennia without the conflicts that plagued other civilizations. But even the most perfect harmony cannot escape the fundamental nature of consciousness, which is always growing, always questioning, always reaching toward new understanding. As the years passed, the brothers began to experience their shared ideals differently. Not because either was wrong, but because their individual growth had led them to emphasize different aspects of the same essential truth. The older brother found himself drawn more and more deeply to the concept of truth. The idea that reality had an objective structure that could be discovered and understood through careful observation and honest inquiry. To him, the foundation of their peaceful kingdom lay in their commitment to seeing things as they actually were, without the distortions of wishful thinking or convenient illusion. Truth, he believed, was the solid ground on which all lasting achievements must be built. The younger brother, while respecting his siblings' dedication to truth, felt equally called to the pursuit of ideals, the vision of what could be rather than mere acceptance of what was. He saw their kingdom's greatest achievements as products not of cold analysis, but of inspired imagination. The willingness to dream of better possibilities and work toward their realization. Ideals, he argued, were the engines of progress and the source of hope. At first, these different emphases enriched their discussions and led to even better decisions, as truth and ideals informed and balanced each other in their deliberations. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, their philosophical differences began to feel more like disagreements than complementary perspectives. Each brother became more convinced that his approach was not just valuable, but essential, while his siblings' emphasis seemed increasingly misguided or even dangerous. The dragon Pokémon that had blessed their unity began to reflect this growing tension. Its single, harmonious form started to show signs of internal conflict, as if the philosophical division between the brothers was creating a resonance that affected its very essence. Sometimes it would glow with the pure white light of revealed truth, other times with the deep blue fire of inspired ideals, and occasionally these energies would clash within its body in ways that seemed to cause it genuine distress. The final rupture came not through any dramatic confrontation, but through the accumulated weight of countless small disagreements, each one deepening the philosophical chasm between the brothers until they could no longer hear each other across the divide they had created. On a quiet morning that had dawned no differently from thousands of others, they looked at each other and realized that they had become strangers, each convinced that the other had betrayed everything they had once shared. In that moment of recognition, the dragon Pokémon that had embodied their unity could no longer maintain its integrated form. With what might have been a sigh of profound sadness, it divided into two separate beings, each one embodying one aspect of the harmony that had been lost. Reshiram emerged first, a magnificent white dragon whose form blazed with the pure fire of truth revealed, its presence burning away illusion and deception to expose the essential reality beneath. Zekrom followed, a powerful black dragon wreathed in blue lightning, its energy crackling with the electric power of ideals pursued with unwavering determination. The battle that ensued was like nothing the world had ever witnessed. This was not a clash between opposing forces, but between two aspects of the same fundamental drive toward righteousness, each convinced of its own necessity and unable to recognize its incompleteness without the other. Reshiram's flames sought to illuminate everything, leaving no shadow where falsehood might hide, while Zekrom's lightning aimed to energize and transform, charging the world with the power needed to achieve unprecedented possibilities. Neither dragon could gain a lasting advantage over the other, for they were essentially equal in power and equally justified in their purpose. Their battles reshaped the landscape around them, creating geological features that would endure for millennia, but no victory emerged from their conflict. Instead, after what seemed like an eternity of futile struggle, both dragons and both brothers came to the same profound realization simultaneously. Truth without ideals was sterile and static, capable of describing what existed but powerless to envision what should exist. Ideals without truth were vaporous and unstable, inspiring but unable to create lasting change in the real world. Neither approach was complete without the other, and their separation had diminished both. The kingdom that had once flourished under their united wisdom was now torn by the very conflict that was supposed to strengthen it. This recognition led not to reconciliation, which would have required admitting error that neither side was prepared to acknowledge, but to a kind of philosophical truce. Both brothers agreed that their conflict had proven the validity of both perspectives, and that attempting to choose between them was itself a form of error. They would rule their separate domains according to their different principles, allowing history to judge which approach better served the needs of conscious beings. Dragon Spiral Tower was constructed as a monument to this resolution, a great spiraling structure that reached toward the sky like a dragon's ascent. This was not a prison for the legendary dragons, but a resting place where they could sleep between the times when their services might be needed, a neutral ground where truth and ideals could coexist without conflict. The tower's architecture embodied the philosophical principles that had both united and divided the kingdom, its ascending spiral suggesting that apparent opposites might be reconciled at higher levels of understanding. The third member of what would become known as the Tau Trio presented a more enigmatic puzzle. Kyurem appeared during this period of division, its icy form suggesting either a connection to the original dragon or an entirely separate origin. Some scholars believed it was the empty shell left behind when the original dragon split, a hollow remnant that retained the capacity for unity but lacked the essential content that Reshiram and Zekrom had carried away with them. Others pointed to ancient legends from Lacunosa town that spoke of Kyurem arriving in a frozen meteor, suggesting that it was an entirely separate being that had come to fill the void left by the original dragon's division. This theory held that Kyurem's ability to fuse with the other dragons was not evidence of shared origin, but rather a unique capability that allowed it to temporarily restore the unity that had been lost. During this same period, a very different kind of legendary Pokémon was making its own contribution to Unovan civilization, though its role would not be fully appreciated until much later. Conkeldurr, a fighting-type Pokémon known for its mastery of construction techniques, began sharing its knowledge with human builders and engineers. The specific craft it taught was the creation of concrete, a material that would seem unremarkable to later generations, but represented a revolutionary advance in construction technology. The significance of this gift cannot be overstated. Concrete allowed humans to build larger, more durable structures than had ever been possible before, enabling the creation of the great cities that would define Unova's character. More importantly, the techniques Conkeldurr shared were not just practical but philosophical, embodying principles of patience, precision, and respect for materials that influenced how humans approached all their creative endeavors. Conkeldurr's teaching methods were as remarkable as the knowledge it shared. Rather than simply demonstrating techniques, it worked alongside human apprentices for months or years at a time, gradually building not just skills but understanding of why particular approaches worked better than others. Its students learned to read the properties of different materials, to anticipate how structures would age and change over time, and to create buildings that would serve not just immediate needs, but the requirements of future generations. As Unova's cities grew and its civilization became more complex, new challenges emerged that required different kinds of protection than the philosophical guardianship provided by the legendary dragons. The rapid expansion of human settlements began to encroach on wild habitats in ways that threatened Pokémon populations, leading to conflicts that neither truth nor ideals seemed adequate to resolve. Into this situation came a group of Pokémon whose dedication to justice had been forged through countless generations of protecting the innocent from those who would abuse their power. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion had each evolved their own approaches to defending the defenseless, but they shared a common commitment to ensuring that strength was used to protect rather than exploit those who could not protect themselves. Cobalion embodied the principles of leadership and strategy, its steel-type nature reflecting the disciplined thinking required to coordinate effective resistance against those who would harm Pokémon habitats. Its presence could inspire other Pokémon to organize and work together, transforming scattered individuals into coordinated communities capable of defending their homes. Terrakion represented the power of direct action, its rock-type strength enabling it to create physical barriers or remove obstacles that threatened Pokémon's safety. Where Cobalion planned and organized, Terrakion executed those plans with the force necessary to make them effective. Virizion brought the wisdom of the natural world, its grass-type connection to plant life, allowing it to find safe paths through dangerous territory and to identify resources that could sustain Pokémon communities during times of crisis. Its knowledge of how ecosystems functioned made it invaluable in identifying threats before they became critical. These three swords of justice, as they came to be known, worked together to establish safe corridors through rapidly developing areas, ensuring that Pokémon populations could maintain their traditional migration routes and breeding grounds, even as human civilization expanded around them. Their methods were not confrontational but strategic, using their combined abilities to create solutions that served both human and Pokémon needs. Their most famous rescue involved a young Pokémon they discovered in the ashes of a forest that had been destroyed by human industrial activity. Keldeo was barely alive when they found it, but something in its spirit caught their attention and moved them to take it under their protection. Unlike their own measured, strategic approaches to justice, Keldeo possessed a fierce energy and natural fighting ability that surpassed even their considerable powers. Under the tutelage of the three swords of justice, Keldeo learned not just fighting techniques, but the deeper principles that should guide the use of strength in service of justice. Its rapid development amazed its mentors, but also created an unexpected challenge when its power grew beyond their ability to provide further instruction. The day came when Keldeo simply disappeared, leaving behind no explanation for its departure. Its reasons remained unknown, though some speculated that it had discovered a calling that required it to work alone, or perhaps that it had found other mentors whose teaching could take it to levels of understanding that even the swords of justice could not provide. Throughout this period, the forces of nature continued their eternal rounds, their presence in Unova reflecting the region's position at the intersection of multiple climate systems and migration routes. Their conflicts and collaborations created the dynamic weather patterns that kept the region's diverse ecosystems healthy, while their seasonal migrations brought renewal and change to areas that might otherwise stagnate. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine the Great Dragon Spiral Tower standing silent under starlight, its spiraling architecture reaching toward peaceful resolution of all conflicts. Truth and ideals rest in harmony within its walls, no longer opposed but waiting for the wisdom that can unite them once again. The swords of justice patrol quiet forests where Pokémon and humans coexist in mutual respect, their vigilance ensuring that morning will bring safety to all who call this complex, beautiful region home. Across the ocean from Unova's philosophical struggles, where mountain peaks caught the first light of dawn and vineyards stretched toward ancient castles, lay a region that would witness one of the most profound explorations of love, loss, and the terrible prices that grief sometimes demands. Kalos was a land of beauty and elegance, where art and nature intertwined in ways that seemed almost effortless, where the very air carried traces of perfumes and the gentle music of Pokémon calls. But beneath this graceful surface, an ancient tragedy had left scars so deep they would influence the region's destiny for thousands of years. The story begins not with legendary Pokémon or cosmic forces, but with something far more intimate and ultimately more powerful: the love between a human and a single, small Pokémon whose presence had become the center of his world. AZ had been a king in the truest sense, not because of the crown he wore, but because of the genuine care he showed for all his subjects, both human and Pokémon alike. His kingdom prospered under his guidance, but his greatest joy was not found in royal duties or grand achievements, but in the quiet moments he shared with his beloved Floette. Floette was not a Pokémon of legendary power or cosmic significance, but rather one of those gentle souls whose beauty lay in their capacity for simple, unconditional love. Her small form seemed to glow with inner light, and her presence brought peace to everyone who encountered her. She had been with AZ since they were both young, growing up together in the royal gardens where she tended flowers with a care that transformed the palace grounds into something that seemed touched by fairy magic. Their bond transcended the typical relationship between trainer and Pokémon, becoming something closer to the connection between two halves of the same soul. AZ would spend hours listening to Floette's soft voice as she sang to her flowers, and she would rest contentedly on his shoulder during long days of royal responsibilities, her presence reminding him that beneath all the complexities of governance lay simple truths about kindness and care. The war that would shatter this peaceful existence came without warning, erupting from conflicts that had been smoldering beneath the surface of international relations for decades. What began as a border dispute escalated into a continental conflict that drew in multiple regions, each convinced that their cause was just and their methods necessary. AZ tried desperately to keep Kalos neutral, but his kingdom's strategic position made isolation impossible. As the conflict spread, it became clear that this was not a war that would be resolved through traditional battles or diplomatic negotiations. New weapons of unprecedented destructive power were being deployed. Technologies that seemed to draw their energy from Pokémon themselves, treating these innocent beings as mere fuel for human ambitions. The very air around battlefields became poisoned with energies that caused flowers to wither and streams to run black with contamination. In the midst of this escalating horror, AZ made the decision that would define the rest of his extraordinarily long life. He would not allow his kingdom to participate in this destruction. But neither could he simply watch as the world tore itself apart around him. Working with the greatest minds of his era, he began developing a weapon that would end the war not through superior destruction, but through the demonstration of a power so awesome that all sides would be forced to abandon their conflicts. The ultimate weapon was conceived as a device that could manipulate the fundamental forces of life and death, channeling enormous amounts of energy to achieve effects that bordered on miraculous. Its primary purpose was defensive, creating barriers and protective fields that could shield entire regions from attack. But its creators also envisioned it as a tool of healing, capable of undoing the damage that war had inflicted on both landscape and living beings. The weapon's construction required resources and knowledge that pushed the kingdom's capabilities to their absolute limits. But AZ drove the project forward with desperate intensity, convinced that only such a dramatic demonstration could shock the warring factions into peace. Floette remained by his side throughout the long months of development, her presence providing the emotional anchor that kept him focused on his ultimate goal of protecting rather than destroying. But war has a way of making even the most careful plans irrelevant. And Kalos could not remain isolated forever. Enemy forces, perhaps learning of the weapon's development and fearing its potential, launched a massive assault on the kingdom before the device could be completed. The battles that followed were among the most devastating ever recorded, with Pokémon and humans falling together in numbers that seemed to numb the mind's capacity for comprehension. In the chaos of the final assault, as AZ fought desperately to protect both his people and his life's work, the unthinkable happened. A stray energy blast, meant for him, struck Floette instead. In an instant, the small Pokémon who had been the source of his greatest joy was gone, her life ending just meters away from the weapon that might have saved her if it had been completed just a few days sooner. AZ's grief transformed into something that went beyond normal human emotion, becoming a force of nature in its own right. The ultimate weapon, still incomplete and untested, became not a tool of protection but an instrument of resurrection. Working with frantic intensity that bordered on madness, he reconfigured its systems to channel the energy not into defensive barriers, but into the fundamental forces that governed the boundary between life and death. The process required a source of life energy, massive enough to bridge the gap between the world of the living and whatever realm Floette's spirit had entered. The energy had to come from somewhere, and in his grief-maddened state, AZ made a choice that would haunt him for millennia. The weapon drew its power from the life forces of countless other Pokémon, each one giving up their existence so that his beloved Floette might return. When the weapon fired, its effects rippled across reality in ways that its creators had never anticipated. Floette did indeed return to life, her small form materializing exactly as AZ remembered her, perfect and beautiful and seemingly unchanged by her journey through death. But the weapon's power had also touched both of them in unexpected ways, flooding their bodies with energies that placed them outside the normal cycles of aging and mortality. AZ's joy at Floette's return was complete but short-lived. As the immediate euphoria faded and he began to understand what he had accomplished, the full magnitude of his crime began to dawn on him. Dozens of Pokémon had died to bring back one, their lives sacrificed on the altar of his personal grief. The very weapon he had intended as a force for peace had become an instrument of mass destruction, and he had been the one to pull its trigger. But Floette herself was not aware of the price paid for her resurrection. And for a brief time, it seemed as though their happiness might be restored. She resumed her care of the palace gardens with the same gentle devotion as before. And AZ tried to convince himself that the cost, however terrible, had been justified by her return. The war was still raging around them, but with Floette back at his side, he felt capable of facing any challenge. The truth could not be hidden forever. And when Floette finally learned what had been done to bring her back to life, her reaction was everything AZ had feared and more. The Pokémon who had embodied pure love and gentleness could not bear the knowledge that her existence had been purchased with the deaths of so many innocent creatures. Her horror at this revelation was compounded by the realization that she, too, had been changed by her passage through death and resurrection, made immortal by the same energies that had restored her life. The confrontation between them was quiet but final. Floette did not rage or accuse, but simply looked at AZ with eyes full of sorrow and disappointment that cut deeper than any anger could have done. Without a word, she turned away from him and flew toward the horizon, leaving behind the gardens she had tended and the life they had shared. Her departure was not dramatic but devastatingly complete, as if she had never existed in his world at all. AZ's response to this abandonment was to compound his original crime with an even greater one. The ultimate weapon, its power now proven and its systems refined through its first activation, was turned toward a new purpose. If the world was so determined to tear itself apart through war, then he would give it the peace of extinction. The weapon fired a second time, its energies now directed not toward resurrection, but toward destruction, on a scale that dwarfed all previous conflicts. The war ended instantly, both sides obliterated by forces beyond their comprehension. Cities vanished in moments, armies dissolved like morning mist, and the very landscape was transformed by energies that left it scarred for generations. AZ had achieved his original goal of ending the conflict, but at a cost that made his first crime seem almost trivial by comparison. In the aftermath of this devastation, as AZ stood alone among the ruins of everything he had tried to protect, his brother took the one action that might prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. Working with the few surviving scientists and engineers, they dismantled the ultimate weapon and buried its components deep underground, scattering the pieces across multiple locations and creating barriers that would make its reconstruction virtually impossible. The weapon's burial was not just a physical act, but a symbolic one, representing the kingdom's collective decision to reject the terrible power that grief and desperation had unleashed. Only AZ himself retained the key that could reactivate the scattered components, and with Floette gone and his people dead, he had no reason to ever use that power again. Immortal and alone, AZ began a wandering that would last for 3,000 years, searching not just for Floette but for some way to atone for what he had done. His long journey took him to every region of the world, but nowhere could he find peace or purpose or any sign of the Pokémon he had lost through his own terrible choices. The ultimate weapon's legacy extended far beyond its immediate destruction. Some scholars theorized that the immense energies it had released had fundamentally altered the structure of matter in the surrounding areas, transforming ordinary evolutionary stones into the megastones that would later allow Pokémon to achieve temporary transformations of unprecedented power. If this theory was correct, then even the positive applications of mega evolution carried within them echoes of that ancient tragedy. Deep beneath Kalos, in chambers protected by layers of stone and metal and technology that few could comprehend, the ultimate weapon's components remained in their eternal slumber. The knowledge of their location and the techniques needed to reunite them were lost to time, but the potential for both creation and destruction that they represented continued to exert a subtle influence on the region's development. Centuries passed, and AZ's story faded into legend, then into myth, then into vague folklore that most people dismissed as fantasy. But the immortal king continued his wandering, growing ever more distant from the world around him, until he seemed more like a natural phenomenon than a human being, a tall figure glimpsed occasionally at the edges of vision, always moving toward some destination that remained forever beyond reach. Eventually, time and chance would bring AZ back to Kalos, where new generations of trainers were just beginning to explore the possibilities that Mega Evolution offered. His return coincided with events that would finally allow him to confront both his past and his future, including a reunion with Floette that would test whether 3 millennia of separation and growth could overcome the terrible choices that had driven them apart. As you rest in this quiet moment, imagine that reunion taking place under starlight, where ancient wounds can finally begin to heal, where forgiveness becomes possible not because the past changes, but because love proves stronger than even the deepest regrets, where two immortal beings learn that even the longest journey can eventually lead home to peace. In the northern reaches of the world, where rolling green hills met misty moors and ancient stones stood as silent witnesses to forgotten ceremonies, lay a region that would come to be known as Galar. This was a land where the past and present intermingled like morning fog, where industrial progress coexisted with pastoral traditions, and where the very air seemed charged with energies that connected every growing thing to forces far older than human memory could reach. 20,000 years before the first human settlements would take root in Galar's fertile soil, something extraordinary fell from the depths of space, blazing across the atmosphere in a streak of otherworldly fire before burying itself deep in the earth. This was no ordinary meteorite, but rather a vessel carrying within it a being of such alien nature that its very presence would eventually reshape the fundamental relationship between Pokémon and the world they inhabited. Eternatus, as it would eventually be known, was perhaps the strangest legendary Pokémon ever to influence earthly affairs. Unlike the Titans that had shaped continents or the Guardians that maintained natural balance, this being existed primarily as living energy, its physical form more a convenience than a necessity. Within its crystalline structure pulsed power drawn from sources beyond terrestrial understanding, energies that could transform matter and enhance life in ways that seemed to violate natural law. For millennia upon millennia, Eternatus remained dormant in its deep resting place. Its alien dreams, perhaps filled with memories of distant stars and cosmic phenomena that no earthly being could comprehend. The land above slowly changed as ice ages came and went, as forests grew and were replaced by different forests, as early humans began their first tentative explorations of the region's hidden valleys and ancient mysteries. The awakening, when it finally came 3,000 years before Galar would know its modern prosperity, was triggered by forces that reached across continents to touch this sleeping giant. Far to the south, in what would become known as Kalos, AZ's ultimate weapon was being discharged with energies so massive they rippled through the planet's very core. These vibrations, carrying with them echoes of life force manipulation on an unprecedented scale, resonated with Eternatus's alien nature in ways that no one could have predicted. Rising from its long slumber like a geyser of pure energy erupting from the Earth's depths, Eternatus brought with it phenomena that transformed the very character of existence in Galar. The sky itself seemed to tear open, revealing glimpses of what appeared to be another dimension where different physical laws held sway. From these rifts poured energies that did not simply add to the natural world, but began changing the fundamental rules by which that world operated. The darkest day began not with destruction, but with transformation, as the black storm that emerged from Eternatus's awakening brought with it the power of Dynamax, the ability for Pokémon to grow to colossal size while retaining their essential nature. This was not the brutal enlargement that artificial enhancement might produce, but rather a temporary ascension that allowed Pokémon to express aspects of their being that normal physical constraints kept hidden. As the storm spread across Galar, Pokémon everywhere began experiencing these transformations, growing to massive size in response to energies they had never encountered before. The landscape itself seemed to adapt to accommodate these giants, with trees stretching taller and meadows expanding as if the very earth recognized that larger beings required more space to move and breathe and live. But the power that Eternatus unleashed was too alien, too divorced from the natural harmonies that had governed the region for millions of years. The Black Storm brought not just transformation but chaos, as Pokémon struggled to adapt to abilities they had never possessed and environments warped by forces beyond terrestrial comprehension. The very air crackled with unstable energies that made normal life increasingly difficult, threatening to transform Galar from a pastoral paradise into something unrecognizably strange. Into this crisis stepped two heroes whose bond with their Pokémon partners would become legendary throughout the region's history. These were not kings or rulers or holders of ancient power, but ordinary people who possessed extraordinary courage and the kind of deep connection with their Pokémon that transcended mere partnership to become something approaching unity of spirit. Their companions were Zacian and Zamazenta, legendary Pokémon whose nature seemed perfectly suited to confronting the alien energies that Eternatus represented. Zacian carried in its jaws a sword that could cut through dimensional barriers and slice apart energy constructs that seemed immune to physical force. Zamazenta bore upon its body a shield that could absorb and redirect the most powerful attacks, while protecting everything that stood behind it from harm. The battle that ensued was unlike any that had been fought on earthly soil. A conflict between terrestrial harmony and cosmic chaos that raged across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Eternatus fought not with malice, but with the desperate confusion of a being thrust into an environment completely alien to its nature, wielding powers that were never meant to interact with earthly matter in such direct ways. Zacian and Zamazenta, guided by their human partners and drawing strength from the deep roots they shared with Galar's ancient soil, approached the conflict not as conquerors but as healers. Their attacks were designed not to destroy Eternatus but to calm it, to help it find a way to exist in this world without overwhelming it with energies too powerful for terrestrial life to withstand. The climax of their confrontation came when the heroes managed to weaken Eternatus enough that its control over the dimensional rifts began to falter. As the alien Pokémon's strength waned, the black storm began to dissipate, and the uncontrolled Dynamax energies that had been pouring from the tiers in space started to stabilize and integrate with the natural environment in more manageable ways. When Eternatus finally fell, its defeat sent shockwaves through the dimensional fabric that caused its massive form to fragment into countless smaller pieces. These crystalline shards scattered across Galar like seeds of transformation, embedding themselves in the landscape and gradually integrating with the natural environment to create what would become known as power spots, locations where the Dynamax phenomenon could occur in controlled and beneficial ways. The aftermath of the darkest day established patterns that would influence Galar's development for millennia to come. The power spots became focal points for communities, locations where Pokémon and humans could experience the wonder of Dynamax transformation in safe and controlled circumstances. The phenomenon became not a source of chaos but of celebration, incorporated into festivals and ceremonies that honored both the power itself and the heroes who had made its beneficial use possible. Zacian and Zamazenta, their great work completed, withdrew from public life in ways that allowed them to become legends rather than rulers. They were occasionally glimpsed in remote locations, still watchful, still ready to act if Galar faced threats beyond the capacity of ordinary defenders to handle. Their legacy lived on not just in stories, but in the ongoing stability of the Dynamax phenomenon and the deep sense of security their presence provided to the region's inhabitants. In the far northern reaches of Galar, where the climate was harsher and the landscape more challenging, another kind of legendary story was unfolding around the same general period. The Crown Tundra was a land that seemed almost separate from the rest of Galar, a place where ice and snow created conditions that tested the resilience of any Pokémon or human brave enough to call it home. Into this demanding environment came Calyrex, a Pokémon whose nature embodied the principles of leadership, wisdom, and the kind of royal bearing that earned respect not through force, but through demonstrated care for subjects and land alike. Calyrex was not a conqueror but a cultivator, possessing abilities that could transform even the most challenging terrain into land capable of supporting abundant life. The people of the Crown Tundra, struggling to survive in conditions that often seemed hostile to human habitation, discovered the injured Calyrex during one of their most difficult winters. Rather than seeing it as merely another Pokémon, they recognized something in its bearing that suggested nobility of spirit, and they took it into their care with the same dedication they showed to their own family members. Under their patient nursing, Calyrex recovered not just its health, but also a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by beings trying to build lives in such demanding circumstances. In gratitude for the care it had received, and in recognition of the genuine need it observed, Calyrex began using its abilities to transform the Crown Tundra's barren fields into fertile agricultural land capable of supporting the communities that had sheltered it. This transformation was not accomplished through force or dramatic displays of power, but through patient work that continued across seasons and years. Calyrex taught the soil to hold nutrients more effectively, encouraged beneficial root systems to establish themselves, and created microclimates where crops could thrive despite the challenging overall environment. The Crown Tundra began to bloom with life in ways that seemed almost miraculous to those who remembered its previous desolation. Calyrex's next great achievement came when it encountered one of the wild horses that roamed the tundra's remote regions. Either the icy glastrier whose coat sparkled like fresh snow, or the spectral spectrier whose mane flowed like captured moonlight. The process of earning these proud steeds' trust and eventually their partnership demonstrated Calyrex's understanding that true leadership came not from dominance, but from proving oneself worthy of followership. Once united with its chosen mount, Calyrex became an even more effective guardian of the Crown Tundra, able to travel quickly across vast distances to address problems before they became crises, to coordinate responses to natural disasters, and to serve as a visible symbol of hope and stability for the human communities that had come to depend on its wisdom. For generations, this arrangement worked beautifully, with Calyrex serving as a benevolent ruler whose decisions reflected both deep understanding of natural systems and genuine care for the welfare of all who lived within its domain. The Crown Tundra prospered under its guidance, developing a unique culture that balanced human ambition with respect for the challenging natural environment. But human memory, even when preserved in stories and traditions, has a tendency to fade over time. As prosperity made life easier, and the original reasons for Calyrex's intervention became less immediately obvious, newer generations began to take their comfortable circumstances for granted. The careful ceremonies that had maintained the connection between human communities and their legendary protector were gradually simplified, then reduced to mere formalities, then eventually allowed to lapse entirely. This gradual forgetting had consequences that extended beyond mere ingratitude. Calyrex's power, like that of many legendary Pokémon, was tied to the recognition and reverence of the beings it protected, as the communities it had served began to forget its role in their prosperity. The Pokémon itself began to weaken, its abilities diminishing as the spiritual connection that had sustained them gradually faded. The horse that had served as Calyrex's mount, recognizing the change in its partner's condition, eventually chose to separate and return to the wild, rather than remain bound to a ruler whose power could no longer sustain their partnership. This abandonment, though not born of malice, further weakened Calyrex and completed its transformation from mighty guardian to a lonely figure whose greatest achievements had been forgotten by those who had benefited from them most. Meanwhile, far to the south, another region was experiencing its own complex relationship with legendary Pokémon and ancient powers. Paldea's story reached back much further than Galar's, extending deep into geological time when the very shape of the land was still being determined by forces that dwarfed human comprehension. 2 million years ago, massive earthquakes had reshaped the region's geography, creating underground caverns and tunnel systems of incredible extent and complexity. In one of these seismic upheavals, a Pokémon of extraordinary nature had become trapped in the deep places of the earth, separated from sunlight and surface conditions in a way that would dramatically affect both its own development and the future history of the region above. Terapagos, as it would eventually be known, was a Pokémon whose nature connected it to some of the most fundamental forces in the universe. Its crystalline shell contained energies that could manipulate the basic structure of matter, allowing it to create the phenomenon that would become known as terastallization, the ability to temporarily transform Pokémon into living embodiments of different elemental types. Trapped in the underground darkness, cut off from the surface world and from contact with other Pokémon, Terapagos entered a state of dormancy that would last for nearly 2 million years. But its dreams during this long sleep were filled with memories and longings that gradually shaped the environment around it, creating Area Zero, a region where the normal laws of nature operated according to different principles. The crater that marked Area Zero's location formed much later, created by forces that remained mysterious even to the most dedicated researchers. This massive circular depression, perfectly centered over the place where Terrapagos slumbered, seemed almost designed to focus and concentrate the strange energies that emanated from the depths below. About 2,000 years before the present day, the great Chaldean Empire reached the height of its power and began turning its attention to the mysterious crater that dominated the southern part of their territory. To them, Area Zero represented the ultimate challenge, a puzzle whose solution might unlock secrets that could secure their empire's dominance for centuries to come. The expeditions they mounted were marvels of organization and technological capability, equipped with the finest gear and staffed by the most capable explorers and researchers the Empire could provide. These brave souls descended into the crater's depths with high hopes and detailed plans, expecting to find treasure or ancient artifacts that would justify the enormous resources being invested in their missions. What they found instead were phenomena that defied explanation and challenged their understanding of how the world worked. Some expeditions reported encounters with Pokémon that seemed to shimmer and shift between different forms, displaying abilities that didn't match any known species. Others described geological formations that seemed to rearrange themselves when not being directly observed, creating mazes that changed their configuration between visits. Most remarkably, several expeditions reported glimpsing what appeared to be a small planet floating freely in the vast spaces deep within the crater, glowing with its own internal light and surrounded by energies that bent space around it in impossible ways. This was Terrapagos in its stellar form, the sleeping Pokemon's consciousness projected into a shape that reflected its cosmic connections and its dreams of stellar phenomena. These sightings were dismissed by Imperial administrators as hallucinations brought on by the strange atmospheric conditions in Area Zero's depths, but the explorers who reported them remained convinced that they had witnessed something of profound significance, something that connected their world to mysteries far beyond earthly understanding. For 1,000 years, the great Chaldean Empire continued its attempts to unlock Area Zero's secrets, each expedition adding to their knowledge while simultaneously deepening the mystery. The resources devoted to these explorations eventually began to strain even the Empire's considerable wealth. But the lure of the unknown proved too powerful to resist. Eventually, the combination of enormous expense and repeated failure began to undermine confidence in the Empire's leadership. Citizens questioned the wisdom of pouring resources into expeditions that seemed to accomplish nothing beyond confirming that Area Zero contained phenomena they couldn't understand. The Empire's decline, when it came, was gradual but inexorable, its power ebbing away like water from a cracked vessel. During the Empire's final centuries, another mystery unfolded that would have tragic consequences for generations to come. A merchant from distant lands, seeking to curry favor with the imperial court, presented the emperor with 4 artifacts of remarkable beauty and obvious age. These were a vessel carved from jade, a broken sword whose metal seemed to hold captured starlight, wooden tablets inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, and a string of beads that hummed with barely contained energy. The emperor, delighted with these unique gifts and unaware of their true nature, had them displayed in his palace as symbols of his wealth and the extent of his empire's influence. But these were the treasures of ruin, artifacts whose beauty concealed powers that fed on the darker aspects of human nature, drawing strength from greed, hatred, envy, and the desire for destruction. As the emperor's obsession with these treasures grew, they began to exert their malevolent influence not just on him, but on his entire court. Decisions became increasingly erratic and cruel. Policies turned toward oppression and exploitation, and the empire's subjects found themselves living under a rule that grew more tyrannical with each passing season. When the treasure's power finally reached the point where it could manifest physically, the Pokémon contained within them burst forth in a rampage of destruction that swept across Paldea like a supernatural wildfire. Chi-Yu spread flames that burned not just matter but hope itself, reducing prosperous cities to ash and despair. Wo Qian strangled the life from vast forests and farmlands, leaving behind landscapes so poisoned they would remain barren for centuries. Qian Pao brought blizzards that froze entire regions solid, entombing communities in ice that refused to melt. Tinglu caused earthquakes that shattered mountains and created chasms that swallowed entire towns. The empire's end came not through conquest by outside forces, but through its own treasures turning against it, demonstrating the terrible consequences that could flow from attempting to possess powers that were never meant to serve human ambition. Only the combined efforts of the region's most skilled Pokémon trainers, working in coordination with their partners and drawing on traditional knowledge that predated the Empire, managed to contain the four destructive forces and seal them away in specially constructed shrines. Centuries later, as Paldea began to recover from this ancient catastrophe, new institutions arose that would take a more cautious approach to exploring the mysteries that the Empire had pursued with such disastrous results. The academy that would become central to the region's educational system was founded on principles that emphasized respect for natural forces rather than attempts to dominate them. Eventually, an explorer named Heath would lead an expedition that succeeded in reaching the very bottom of Area Zero, becoming the first person in recorded history to fully document the strange phenomena that filled the crater's depths. His careful observations, recorded in books that would become known as the Scarlet and Violet volumes, provided the first scientific descriptions of paradox Pokémon and the reality-altering effects of prolonged exposure to Terrapagos's influence. Heath's team also made the fateful decision to plant Herba Mystica throughout Paldea, hoping to use these powerful plants to improve agricultural yields across the region. However, the herb's extraordinary potency created unintended consequences, causing certain Pokémon to grow to enormous size and become the Titan Pokémon that would challenge future generations of trainers. As you drift toward deeper rest, imagine the quiet moment when ancient powers finally find peace. When the sleeping Pokémon in Area Zero's depths dream gentle dreams of stellar beauty, when the treasures of ruin rest safely in their shrines, no longer threatening the world with their dark influence, and when the crown of Calyrex catches moonlight in a tundra transformed by love into a garden where all beings can find rest and renewal. Across all the regions where Pokémon and humans have learned to coexist, beyond the dramatic stories of creation and conflict that capture the imagination, a quieter but no less important drama unfolds each day with the reliability of sunrise and the gentleness of falling snow. This is the story of guardianship, of legendary Pokémon whose greatest acts are the ones that go unnoticed, whose most profound victories are the disasters that never happen, the harmony that continues unbroken, the delicate balances that persist through seasons and centuries without fanfare or recognition. High above the peaceful lakes of Sinnoh, three small figures maintain their eternal vigil over the mental and emotional development of all conscious beings. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf continue the work they began at the very foundation of the universe, but their influence has grown more subtle and sophisticated as the world has become more complex. They no longer simply grant the capacity for knowledge, emotion, and will, but actively nurture these gifts as they develop in countless individual minds across the globe. Uxie's presence can be felt in the moment when a child first understands that symbols on a page carry meaning, when a researcher makes a connection between seemingly unrelated phenomena, when an elderly person shares hard-won wisdom with someone just beginning their journey. Its influence flows through libraries and schools, through quiet conversations between teacher and student, through the patient accumulation of understanding that allows civilizations to grow in wisdom rather than merely in size. Mesprit's touch is evident in every act of compassion, every moment of joy shared between friends, every parent's protective love, and every tear shed for beauty too profound for words. Its energy moves through wedding celebrations and funeral gatherings, through the laughter of children at play and the contented silence of companions who need no words to understand each other. Mesprit ensures that the world never becomes a cold place of pure logic, that hearts continue to guide hands toward kindness. Azelf's gift manifests in the determination of those who refuse to give up on their dreams. The courage of those who stand up for what is right, despite personal cost. The persistence of those who continue working toward goals they may never live to see completed. Its strength flows through every person who chooses hope over despair, action over apathy, growth over stagnation. A Zelf ensures that the future remains full of possibility, rather than predetermined by past patterns. These three guardians work in perfect coordination, their influences interweaving to create the complex tapestry of consciousness that makes sapient life possible. They prevent the intellectual arrogance that might come from knowledge without compassion, the emotional chaos that might result from feeling without understanding, and the aimless confusion that could emerge from will without wisdom to guide it. In the tropical paradise of Alola, 4 other guardians maintain a different but equally essential form of protection. The Tapu Pokémon have divided the region's islands among themselves, each one taking responsibility for maintaining the unique character and ecological balance of their assigned territory. But their guardianship extends far beyond simple environmental protection to encompass the cultural and spiritual development of the human communities that share their domains. Tapu Koko watches over Melemele Island with the restless energy of lightning itself, ensuring that innovation and progress never stagnate, but also never advance so quickly that wisdom cannot keep pace. Its influence can be felt in the region's technological development, the careful balance between embracing new possibilities and preserving valuable traditions. When storms threaten the island, Tapu Koko's presence in the winds ensures that the destruction is minimal and that the renewal that follows brings genuine benefit. Tapu Lele tends to Akala Island's lush gardens and healing springs, its psychic abilities maintaining the delicate emotional equilibrium that allows diverse communities to coexist peacefully. Its influence flows through the island's festivals and celebrations, through the healing practices that combine traditional knowledge with modern understanding, through the profound sense of community that helps residents support each other through both joy and difficulty. Tapu Bulu oversees Ula Ula Island's wild spaces and agricultural areas, ensuring that human cultivation enhances rather than diminishes the natural abundance of the land. Its strength can be felt in the health of crops and forests alike, in the migration patterns of native Pokémon, and in the deep respect that farmers and gardeners develop for the soil that sustains them. Tapu Fini guards Pony Island's sacred sites and ancient mysteries, maintaining the spiritual connections that link present generations to their ancestral wisdom. Its presence can be sensed in the island's preserved archaeological sites, in the traditional ceremonies that continue to mark important life transitions, and in the profound sense of continuity that helps communities navigate change without losing their essential identity. These 4 guardians coordinate their efforts through means that human observers can only dimly comprehend, creating weather patterns that benefit all the islands simultaneously, maintaining ocean currents that support marine life throughout the region, and preserving the subtle spiritual atmosphere that makes Alola a place where both Pokémon and humans can achieve their fullest potential. Throughout the forests of the world, wherever ancient trees cast cool shadows over moss-covered streams, Celebi continues its timeless work of ensuring ecological continuity across the centuries. Its ability to travel through time allows it to serve as a living bridge between past and future, carrying seeds from healthy forests to areas recovering from disaster, sharing genetic diversity between isolated populations, and maintaining the long-term stability that allows complex ecosystems to persist through climate changes and natural cycles. Celebi's influence is most evident in those special groves where visitors report feeling an unusual sense of peace and connection to the natural world. These forests seem to exist partially outside normal time, their ancient trees and crystal-clear streams unchanged by the passing decades. Here, endangered species find sanctuary. Rare plants maintain their foothold in an increasingly developed world, and weary travelers discover renewal that reaches deeper than simple rest. The legendary Pokémon of weather and climate continue their ancient work of maintaining the atmospheric patterns that make life possible across diverse environments. Rayquaza still patrols the upper atmosphere, its presence stabilizing ozone layers and ensuring that cosmic radiation reaches the surface in amounts that support rather than threaten life. Its flight paths, invisible to ground-based observers, follow routes that help maintain proper air circulation between different regions of the globe. Ho-Oh's migrations carry with them the promise of renewal, its rainbow-colored feathers leaving traces in the atmosphere that promote healthy precipitation patterns and support the formation of beneficial cloud systems. Where Ho-Oh has passed, the air itself seems to carry healing properties, and plant growth becomes more robust and sustainable. In the deepest parts of the ocean, legendary sea Pokémon maintain the current systems that distribute warmth and nutrients throughout the world's marine ecosystems. Kyogre's dreams, even while it slumbers in abyssal trenches, influence the flow of water masses that carry microscopic life from tropical breeding grounds to polar feeding areas. Its breathing creates the subtle pressure changes that help maintain the delicate balance between surface and deep waters. Lugia's presence in storm systems ensures that these powerful weather events bring more benefit than destruction. Its psychic abilities channeling wind and rain in ways that replenish groundwater, nourish drought-stressed ecosystems, and clear pollutants from both air and sea. The storms that Lugia guides leave behind landscapes that are cleaner and more fertile than they were before the tempest arrived. In mountainous regions across the world, other legendary guardians work quietly to prevent the geological disasters that could devastate entire regions. Groudon's continued slumber is not merely absence from the surface world, but active participation in maintaining crustal stability. Its dreams help regulate tectonic pressures, ensuring that seismic energy is released gradually through minor tremors rather than building to catastrophic earthquakes. Regigigas, even in its sealed chamber, continues to influence continental stability through barely detectable adjustments to the Earth's rotation and magnetic field. Its presence helps maintain the precise orbital characteristics that keep seasons regular and climate patterns stable across geological timescales. The legendary golems that Regigigas created continue their own forms of geological stewardship. Regirock monitors the stability of cliff faces and mountain slopes, preventing landslides that could threaten communities below. Regice maintains the integrity of permafrost in polar regions, ensuring that frozen ground continues to support the unique ecosystems adapted to these challenging conditions. Registeel helps maintain the proper distribution of minerals in the soil, ensuring that plants have access to the nutrients they need for healthy growth. Throughout the world, migration routes established millions of years ago are still maintained by nomadic legendary Pokémon, whose movements follow patterns so ancient they have become part of the planet's natural rhythm. These migrations ensure genetic diversity among widely separated populations, carry nutrients and energy between different ecosystems, and provide the kind of long-term stability that allows species to adapt to gradually changing conditions. Latios and Latias serve as messengers and coordinators among other legendary Pokémon, their incredible speed allowing them to maintain communication networks that span continents. Their flights carry not just information, but subtle influences that help synchronize the activities of guardians working in different regions, ensuring that local efforts contribute to global harmony rather than creating unintended conflicts. Human communities, where they maintain close connections to these protective forces, often develop traditions and ceremonies that acknowledge and honor the work being done on their behalf. These festivals and observances serve practical purposes beyond mere gratitude, creating regular opportunities for communities to assess their relationship with the natural world and make adjustments that support long-term sustainability. Sacred groves and temple complexes maintained by local communities provide focal points for these interactions, places where the boundary between the everyday world and the realm of legendary Pokémon becomes permeable enough for meaningful communication. These sites require constant care and attention, not because the legendary Pokémon demand elaborate offerings, but because the act of maintenance itself helps communities stay aware of their dependence on forces greater than themselves. Over time, however, the success of these protective systems often leads to their own invisibility. As life becomes easier and more predictable, younger generations may begin to take stability for granted, viewing the ceremonies and traditions of their elders as quaint relics rather than essential practices. The gradual erosion of these connections doesn't immediately cause disasters, but it does weaken the bonds between human communities and their legendary guardians. When these bonds fade completely, The legendary Pokémon don't abandon their protective roles, but their work becomes less effective and more difficult. Without human awareness and cooperation, maintaining environmental balance requires more direct intervention, which can sometimes appear to human observers as natural disasters rather than protective measures. Paradoxically, this pattern of forgetting and rediscovering creates its own kind of cycle. As old legends fade into myth, new ones are born from contemporary encounters with legendary Pokémon. Each generation discovers these protective forces anew, developing their own understanding of how to live in harmony with powers beyond human comprehension. The legendary Pokémon themselves adapt to these changing relationships, finding new ways to carry out their ancient responsibilities even as the world around them continues to evolve. Their ultimate goal has never been to be remembered or worshipped, but simply to ensure that life in all its magnificent diversity can continue to flourish on a planet that remains capable of supporting wonder, growth, and the endless possibility of conscious beings reaching toward their highest potential. As you settle into the deepest rest, feel yourself held by this invisible network of guardianship, protected by forces that work tirelessly to maintain the conditions that make peaceful sleep possible, surrounded by legendary beings whose greatest joy comes not from dramatic victories, but from the quiet satisfaction of another day successfully preserved, another night safely guided toward the promise of morning's renewal. As these ancient stories settle into the quiet corners of your mind, you can feel yourself drifting deeper into rest, surrounded by the gentle presence of legendary guardians watching over the world. The cosmic dance of creation continues in slow, peaceful rhythms. Dialga's river of time flowing steadily forward like a lullaby that has played since the universe began. Palkia's infinite space stretching in all directions to hold every dream and every possibility in its boundless embrace, and Arceus's thousand arms guiding everything toward harmony with the patient wisdom of eternity itself. Somewhere in distant regions, Ho-Oh circles above silver towers, its rainbow feathers catching starlight and scattering it like blessings across sleeping landscapes. Celebi tends to dreaming forests, where ancient trees whisper stories of seasons beyond counting, their roots reaching deep into earth that remembers the first gentle rains. The lake trio floats serenely above mirror-still waters, sharing dreams of wisdom, joy, and determination with all who rest beneath their watchful care. In the depths of peaceful oceans, Kyogre's slow breathing creates currents that carry life and renewal to every corner of the world. While high above, Rayquaza glides through starlit skies, its presence ensuring that the atmosphere itself cradles all living things in perfect, protective balance. The legendary beasts wander quiet paths through moonlit meadows, carrying Ho-Oh's blessing of renewal to places where it's needed most, their footsteps leaving traces of healing in their wake. You are part of this vast, interconnected tapestry of stories, myths, and legends, held safely within the same cosmic order that guides the dance of galaxies and the turning of seasons. Like the Pokémon world itself, you can rest knowing that gentle guardians watch over the night. That morning will bring new possibilities touched by ancient wisdom, and that some stories are so beautiful they continue even in the depths of sleep. Let these legends carry you now into the deepest rest, where dragons dream of ancient skies painted with auroras of impossible beauty, where time moves like honey through chambers of crystal and starlight, and where every breath brings you closer to peaceful, restorative slumber. The Pokémon world sleeps with you, wrapped in the eternal care of beings whose love extends beyond understanding, whose protection flows like gentle rivers through every dream, ensuring that even in sleep you are never alone but always held in the vast, loving embrace of forces that have watched over conscious life since the first moment. Light touched the cosmic darkness and found it good.